Shalom, SUC back in the building. Source Gang back in the building. 7 Gang, Source Gang over everything. You know how we rocking, man. We back. You see us knocking at the door. Let the readers in. So we gonna let the readers in, man. We actually read books over here. We read over here. We go into the material and disseminate from there. Hey, shalom, Scott Garrett Headley. Shalom to the family that support the channel. Hit that like button, subscribe, and share. Share to the social media platforms. Start giving y'all energy to the Israelite platforms. I see a lot of y'all over there on the naysayers platforms. Y'all giving them views. You know what I'm saying? Give that energy to Orthodox Moors channel. Get that energy to the Sister East channel. Get that energy to Ron Shields' channel, Kingdom Harbinger Ministries. You understand? Channel that energy towards Israelite entities and YouTube channels instead of giving it to our naysayers. I can't say this enough. It's been our biggest mistake. It's focusing majority of our time bolstering the naysayers, the oppositional forces on their channels and giving them content and giving them media and building them up. We literally help Sarnetta build the channel that he has. We literally help the others build the channel that they have. Go to your own Israelite community, start building up those channels. All right, with no further ado, we're going to open up with LV Europa before we get into the chapter. Hey, shalom, Sean Harris. Shalom, James. Shalom, Lyrical Gordon Yahoo. Shalom. Yeah, we're going to get it in tonight, man. We're going to get it in, man. Chapter 8. But before we do, like every show, we're going to open up with a banger. Source Gang.
Yo, LV Europa. Follow me on Facebook, YouTube, Europa Report TV. Woo! Special shout out to everybody that makes the community what it is. And we gonna prove, no matter what we believe, we can still get into that motherfucking sauce, nigga. Talk to me nice. This one a different vibe. This one a different high. I got a different love. Yes, I serve a different eye. I am Judah the home turf, bitch. I'm from a different tribe. If it's problem, then we gotta go get it. We cross the line. Man, I'm back on my premise. Life was really looking grimace. Chopped it up with the bros. I know what I know, but still, and shout out the Wiggins. Y'all niggas kittens. You gotta be kidding, my nigga. I do know the difference. I had a diamond stuck in a hard place, but every stone don't glisten. Shout out to me shit. Oh, you smell the secretion. Give a word like Ephesians, you gotta repeat it, cause they wanna delete it. Who spoke that on the fetus? Talk to my nigga Drake Gates. He gon' tell you about faith. Or maybe I'ma ask PJ. I know he know about grace. This is supposed to lead to the bait. No kitty popping. I want cheese on my cake. Some niggas be lying in gyms. I'm tired of friends. You can see that on my face. Hey. Yo, Rory, go tell all the people I'm here and they'll never replace this Neo love that I got in my heart. And they know they can't take it away. This one a different vibe. This one a different high. I got a different love. I serve a different eye. You in the home turf, bitch. I'm from a different tribe. If it's problem, then we gotta go get it. But we cross a different line. This one a different vibe. This one a different high. I got a different love. I serve a different eye. True to the home turf, bitch. I'm from a different tribe. If it's problem, then we gotta go get it. We cross a different line. This one a different vibe. This one a different high. I got a different love. I serve a different eye. True to the home turf, bitch. I'm from a different tribe. If it's problem, then we gotta go get it. But we cross a different line. Man, I'm back on my premise. Andrew, shout outs to Kim and I'm rocking with Gabby. Put it to rest some falsehoods. I'm learning my nigga. I feel like Tahiti. Short soul graffiti. I read it and said it in needy. I broke bread and gave half to the wife. Damon McClain said never be greedy. No pretending little nigga. No contention little nigga. These words are truth. What I mention little nigga. You gon' get it little nigga. Wait. Yo, John Hawkins, it's broken nigga. You agree with the crime? It's nothing new when it's lawyer the crib might break bread when I sit with the wrong. Great aim when that time is black. My main fact is go get a Quran. It's right trying to be on my bumper. Tell John Bird, take a shit his lawn. Rubber Report TV, my main mission. Everybody getting along. I pay hard when I get a receipt. Oh, y'all better open your strongs.
Yo, like I said, as always, fantastic material by our brother LV Europa. All right, man. I'm going to get some shout outs before I get into the book, man. Shout out to the whole Source Click, Source Gang, Sourced Up Click. You know what I'm saying? Shout out to the CEO, Jeremiah. Please say the Yah. Put some respect on his name. Shout out to my broski, swinging and banging all the way from Atlantic Canaan, my brother James Cassell. Shout out to D Red, the blue collar scholar. Shout out to Diamond. You know what I'm saying? Sister been holding it down. Shout out to the Dun Dada, the best shotter. Dun Bird, otherwise known as Pro Rizzo 1. You understand? Tanks on the ground. Shout out to my brother, General Yashar. You know what I'm saying? Holding it down. Shout out to Elder Yara. You know what I'm saying? Holding it down. Y'all ain't seen it. He laid the smackdown on like 2 weeks ago. You know what I'm saying? You can check that debate out. Shout out to Anonymous Hebrew. And shout out to Orthodox Moore. And also shout out to Sister E. I see you. You doing big things with your channel, man. So we're going to give praise to those that's putting in the work in the community. And all you guys that are watching and hearing my voice today, go support the Israelite platforms. I see a lot of you guys supporting the naysayers platforms. You need to start sending that same energy, if not better, towards these Israelite platforms. All right. With no further ado, let's get right into chapter 8. As promised, chapter 8 will be reviewed, discussed today. And tomorrow, the ending of the book, because we actually read books over here, will be read live, discussed, critiqued, commentary added tomorrow. And the way he ended the book was amazing in my view. Tudor Parfitt is a very objective scholar. Like I said, he gives pros and cons and caveats all throughout his book. You understand? And just like a true scholar would do, like John's Discourse, same thing. They're open. You understand? They're not like these scenics on the internet. So again, we take all the information, digest, and disseminate. But before we get into the information and before we get into the book, until we get into today's chapter 8, we got to always cover ourselves. You know, CYA is the main policy. It's a universal policy, right? So since we're dealing with copyrighted information, I do not own the rights to this information that I'm going to be sharing today, but I am covered under the Fair Use Act. Section 107 of the Copyright Act provides the statutory framework for determining whether something is a fair use and identifies certain types of uses such as criticisms, commentary, news reporting, teaching, scholarship, and research. We're going to be dealing with teaching, scholarship, and research, and commentary, and a few critiques here and there. So a mixture of all that. So I am covered under Section 107 of the Copyright Act, the Fair Use Act. I just wanted that to be known and shown on the screen here at the source. All right. So we're well within our rights to do this work. All right, let's get into the meat and potatoes of this discussion. You guys should be able to see this on the screen. I'm going to actually expand it so you all can see the words clearly. Shalom, Royal Prince. Shout out, brother. Let's get it. All right, now we cooking with Crisco. Now we cooking, man. All right. Black Jews in Africa in the Americas by Tudor Parfitt, Chapter 8, The Internalization of the Israelite Myth. During the long period of absorption of various Israelite and African discourses, Jewish and Israelite identities were often embedded in anti-colonial rhetoric and selected or adopted, at least in part, as a means of asserting some measure of independence from colonial authority. And this was as true in central and southern parts of the continent as it was in the West. And like I said, again, Tudor Parfitt, he brings the negative and affirmative, the pros and cons of this ideology. But, you know, what I find interesting, even if you take a minimalist approach to this and say, okay, these guys are not connected to the Israelites at all, even if you look at it from an ideological standpoint that it was used as a defense and a mechanism to combat colonial powers or white supremacy or racism, that's even being ignored, because a lot of people, a lot of the naysayers will say, well, this religion hasn't done anything for us. This ideology hasn't done anything for us. I mean, if you just take everything away from it and just look at that fact alone, we can see that it did do something for us. It helped us combat colonial authority, racism, especially during a period of time where the powers that be was enforcing racist, colorist ideas through racial theory, which is discussed in this book, that blacks are primitive, they have no history, and they deserve to be in servitude and enslaved. So this ideology helped combat that. So if you could take, let's say you say, oh, none of that stuff real, that's one thing you could take from it, and you can't knock it. How could you knock that? All right, let's keep reading. There are some striking examples of this in the early 20th century history of Uganda. The first envoys of the Church Missionary Society arrived at King Mutesa's Uganda's court in 1877, and by 1914, nearly the whole area was evangelized. One of the stratagems employed by the missionaries was to stress that what they were preaching was not just a cunning plot cooked up by the British to extend their control over the region and legitimize their presence. They explained that the British themselves had learned this wisdom from the Oriental foreigners, a people called the Jews. It followed then that if all powerful British could accept religious truth from foreigners, so too could Africans. It was not long before Africans already introduced to the Bible started showing a keen interest in its authors and principal players. In the 1890s, Philip O. Flaherty, a CMS missionary at the Uganda court, observed that the customs and the manners of the Jews were of the greatest possible interest to black people in Uganda. In his preaching, he stressed that Jesus Christ was a Jew, and we Europeans did not follow one of our own race. We look for the truth where it has to be found, and we found it among the Jews. The impact of the Israelite trope in Uganda was powerful and swift. British explorers had reached the area of today's Uganda by the 1860s, followed by the first Protestant missionaries in 1877. Uganda was ruled by Great Britain as a protectorate from 1894. One of the Judaizing groups that sprang up as a response to colonial intervention was the Society of the One Almighty God, which was founded in 1913 by a Muganda called Musa Jakawa Malaki, 1875 to 1929. Within 7 years of his movement, numbered 90,000 people. His followers, his followers who kept the Jewish Sabbaths were known as Malachites, or as the Christian Jews. They opposed the colonial government in a number of critical areas, including land redistribution and public health. They vehemently opposed the use of Western medicine. Malaki himself died as a result of a hunger strike, having refused to allow his followers to participate in the vaccination program. A follower of Malaki was Seme Kakungulu, 1869 and 1928, who had converted to the Protestant faith in the 1880s. He was one of the most remarkable Ugandans of his generation, a man of great spiritual and intellectual curiosity. and as a military leader and gifted military strategist on the British side against the Muslims. One of the architects of modern Uganda, Kakungulu, formally joined the Malakites in 1913, but within a couple of years moved further in the direction of the practice of a kind of Judaism. He had scrutinized the Bible and had perceived that the British, who were fond of telling blacks how to behave in a Christian way and who regularly invoked the Bible, failed in fact to observe most of its laws. And I mean, this is just common sense. If you read the book and then you see modern Christianity or people that are beholden to the tenets of modern Christianity, you're going to clearly see a sharp contrast, even in the New Testament, because when you go to the New Testament, you're going to see these people observing the commandments. You're going to see Christ saying not to forbid Moses, as Moses wrote of me, and things of that nature. You're going to see them keeping the Sabbath. You're going to see them still adhering to the dietary laws. You're going to see them talking about uncleanness and ritual bathings and washing. They're still going to see these same tenets being echoed in the New Testament. So even if you just look at the New Testament, it's like, yo, you guys is not in line with the actual material in question. So, it's just eye-opening that this brother saw this years ago with these British that was coming with this medieval remixed Christianity that wasn't observing the Most High's laws. And he was like, y'all bogus. I'm not dealing with that. All right, so back into the book. He said he thought this was wrong and set about observing Saturday Sabbath, refused to eat pork, and introduced other Old Testament measures. He obliged his followers to do likewise. He realized that the British calendar was at odds with the arrangements set out in the Bible, and he established his own calendar on biblical principles. In 1919, having declared, we now will be known as Jews, he was circumcised along with his first son, whom he called Judah. His second son was subsequently circumcised on the 8th day in the Jewish fashion and was named Nimrod. In 1922, Kakungulu published a 90-page book of rules, which was essentially a guide to Judaism intended to help his followers observe Jewish law correctly. After 1924, some Jews working for the British brought further information about Judaism, which was incorporated into the group's observance. Kakungulu made no claims of ancient Israelite origin, and to this day, his followers consider themselves as converts to Judaism. So this group did not attach themselves or saying that, we came from lineal Israelites. We descend from them. They were just observing the Bible and saying, hey, we're going to follow this thing. We're going to follow it exactly how it's written. And that's what we say. Okay, we're going to follow this tradition and claim this tradition. We're going to keep the laws. And I know a lot of, Christian sects out there they speak against the laws, and they speak against many of the tenets in the book. But I mean, how do you look at this book, read this book, digest this book, and try to circumvent that? So they came to that realization. That's what made them claim to be Jews, by seeing that and wanting to draw themselves close to that. All right, it says the inspiration of his self-identification as a Jew came from the preaching of British missionaries and from the Bible, but did not lead to the interrogation of rereading of his own tribal narrative or the creation of an alternative ethnicity. He used his self-identification as a Jew as a weapon, disenchanted with the British, whom he accused of having exploited him and his troops for their own purposes. He withdrew his cooperation and moved his principal residence into the western foothills of Mount Elgin, east of Mbali, to a place called Gangama, where he inaugurated a separatist sect known at first as the Kibina Kia Bayudaya Absega Katonda, the community of Jews who trust in the omnipotent God. There was little the British could do about it, and he thus became quasi-independent of colonial rule. So that, so anybody saying, "What has the Bible ever done for our people?" Well, he used that ideology to combat colonial rule, became separate, and was able to remove himself from what he felt was an oppressive force. Let's keep reading. It says, his followers, who are called the Abba numbered around 3,000 at their peak and are still to be found in around the town of Mobile in eastern Uganda, in a number of communities centered on synagogues and other communal institutions. Despite persecution at the time of Idi Amin, when many of the community converted to Christianity or Islam, they are today some thousands strong. I visited the community in 1998 along with the Orthodox Jews with whom I was traveling to Ethiopia. He remarked that the Sabbath service we attended in one of the synagogues was identical to services in his own synagogue in North London. There have been regular and growing links between the Abba Yudaya and Israeli and Western Jews in the community. It's often sent books and ritual objects, sometimes with the encouragement of the Israeli authorities. The Abba Yudaya are observant followers of Judaism, many having taken formal conservative conversions, helped them by visiting rabbis, and they now have strong links with Jewish communities in the United States and Israel. In addition, they have close links with Black Jewish communities in Africa and the United States. The genesis of the faith of the Abba Yudaya is to be found in the internalization of ideas that were planted in Uganda in the first years of missionary intervention and colonial rule. Perhaps the most dramatic and tragic of the consequences of the invention of a defiant Israelite identity as a defense against colonialism in African context may be perceived in the life and work of the prophet of God, Enoch Josiah Migima, 1858 to 1929. In this case, the Israelites' topos can be traced back in part to a transatlantic influence. William Saunders Crowdy, the African-American Hebrew Israelite, founded his Church of God and Saints of Christ in 1896. Far away in Africa, Albert Christian, a West Indian or Xhosa sailor, had what he took to be a vision in which he saw a particular man and was bidden to go to the United States, where he would meet him in the flesh. He eventually arrived in the United States, and one day in Philadelphia, walking along Fitzwater Street, he saw a man at a shoe shine stand whom he recognized as the man of his dream. It was William Crowdy. Crowdy made Christian an elder of his church, and Christian went on to help spread the Crowdy message in the United States. Later, he was ordained as a bishop of the movement and was ordained to return to South Africa to propagate Crowdy's message. In 1905, he set up the Church of God and Saints of Christ in Uitenhage in Eastern Cape Province, where it is still going strong. He died the following year at the age of 38 upon his return to the United States. Christian was succeeded by Charles Mohalabane as head of the South African movement. Mohalabane succeeded in setting up branches in the Natal, but during a mission in Mozambique, disappeared and was never seen again. In 1909, Crowdy sent Bishop John Miskinya, a South African who had become a follower of Crowdy's while studying at Lincoln University in Philadelphia, to run the movement in South Africa. 2 years before the arrival of Miskinya in South Africa, Enoch Migima had his first vision while hunting in the mountains. In his vision, he perceived 3 mountains of different heights, which he took to be signs that some people would accept him as a prophet immediately, some reluctantly, and some only with the gravest difficulty. He saw an angel in his dreams who warned him about a coming conflict in which only the faithful would be spared. 3 years later, in 1910, he saw Halley's Comet and took this as a confirmation of his prophetic mission and a sign that he should abandon Christianity and embrace the religion of the ancient Hebrews. He soon attracted a considerable following, seeing the similarity between his own beliefs and those of the Church of God and Saints of Christ. Migima, now joining forces with Crowdy's disciples, upon Miskina's death in 1918, Migima inherited the leadership of the church. By this time, the main tenets of his syncretic faith were the keeping of the Sabbath, a scorn of the New Testament, which was regarded as the white man's invention, a millennial belief that the Israelites were the holy elect of Jehovah and will be delivered from the tyranny of whites, as the Hebrews had been delivered from the power of the Pharaoh in Egypt, and a belief along Pentecostal and holiness lines in the imminence of the end of days. Passover was celebrated, white gowns were worn, and trumpets blown during religious meetings, an approximate imitation of Jewish practice. So before we read on, I want to bring out that Crowley had a lot of reach. Not only that he dealt with the United States over here, but he went from Tennessee and all over, and then went from there to Africa. He actually, what's what we're reading about, that he actually had influence in the continent of Africa. All right, so let's read on. It says, not far beneath the surface of McKeema's teaching was a clear anti-colonial agenda. His visions, which he freely shared with his followers, became incendiary. One starkly political vision involved two goats taken to be the British and Boers, which were bloodily torn apart by a great black baboon representing black people. So he was saying he had a vision that they was going to take down the British, man. It was going to be brutal. And that's the vision that he was saying he was disseminating to his people. Revenge on those that oppress him. Let's keep reading. It says, his visions continued along these lines. And a few months after taking over the leaderships of the church, he was asked to resign. He immediately set up his own organization, which he called the Israelites. In 1920, Natablanga mountain in the Eastern Cape, he received another message from God and decided to set up a community around a place where he had received a divine inspiration. Many Israelites flocked to the area and built several hundred huts around Naibalanga on what was Crown land. The following year, the Israelites compounded the crime of swatting by refusing to divulge their names for the census. They argued that this was unnecessary as God knew who they were. A force of policemen arrived in Natabalanga to evict them, and the two sides prepared for battle. Now we're going to read something that happened that was very disastrous with this group of people. And this is why I always warn people in modern times, stop being so religious. Your religiosity should not extend to extremism. And what they told these people was, why should they have to identify themselves? God already know who they were. That's something I don't even want to touch on it live, but some groups, some people, let me put it like that, are at that level where their religiosity is so big that they will put them and others in harm's way. And we cannot operate like that. That's not being smart. That's not being wise. And if you're going to be wise, and you have to be prudent and see these things as being destructive and not constructive. And as we're going to see that this did not, fare well for this group of people. So let's read on. It says, the Israelites were armed with knob carries, agassiz, one or two antiquated guns and knives. The police had modern rifles and machine guns, in probable imitation of the Shosha proper chief Makana Neksheli during the 5th Shosha War and the Shosha prophet Malahani during the 8th Shosha War. Nehemiah assured the Israelites that the police bullets would turn to water and that they could not be harmed. All right, before we read on, this is what I'm talking about. This over-religious attitude, what I'm saying? And I see it in the modern groups. And I'm speaking for Israelites because I that's who I engage with. And most of my adult history is dealing with Israelites. We can't be doing stuff like this. Because as we're going to see, again, this ended badly for these brothers and sisters. It says, so he just told them, the chief just told them that, don't worry, the bullets will turn to water. You understand? And this is what happened. It says the outcome was tragic. One policeman was speared, while 163 Israelites were left dead on the field of battle, and a further 129 were wounded. They were wounded. This happened. This resulted in 163 deaths and 129 people wounded. So again, and this happened, if you read the book of Maccabees, there's another story like this where the people were so religious observant of the Sabbath, they didn't want to fight the Greeks on the Sabbath because, no, it's the Sabbath. We're not supposed to do anything. We're not supposed to work. We're not supposed to fight. It's the Sabbath. No, what's wrong with you guys? You guys are being attacked. Pick up your swords and fight. Your religiosity should not extend to extremism. And that's what happened in this case. That's what happened in the days of old. I can give you another account in the time of Nehemiah. The Israelites were trying to rebuild the wall. And it tells you in that at that particular time that there were other nations surrounding about Israel that was trying to thwart their attempts of rebuilding that wall during Nehemiah's time. And the people that was living in Judea at the time was holding these laws over the head of the poor. If someone owed you money during that time, there's a law that they could work that off and become debt slaves to you to work that off. And he's like, listen, we at war right now. Why is y'all doing this? He was checking their religiosity. He was like, listen, we at war. We trying to rebuild the wall. You understand? A lot of us have just got annexed. Like, forgive all these debts right now and start feeding these people and housing these people so we can reconstitute ourselves as a nation. That's called pragmaticism. You understand? So you got to be pragmatic, not dogmatic. And we see dogmatism got these people killed. And, you know, when I was reading over this, I was like, I'm going to have to bring that out because history can't repeat itself. And we don't want that type of behavior and that type of thinking to creep back in. And it already has. And I'm not going to speak about it live. But yeah, man. Yeah, we have to be mindful of these things. Because look what happened to this group of people. They were massacred, man, because they thought that the bullets would turn to water. All right. All right, so let's get back into it, man. It says, at the conference of the Pan-African Freedom Movement in Addis Ababa in January 1962, where Nelson Mandela was representing the ANC, he picked out the Bull Hoke Massacre as the Not-to-Belonga Massacre had come to be called, as perhaps the single worst atrocity in the history of South Africa. It is still remembered. A Bull Hoke Massacre Heritage Memorial was unveiled with due ceremony on May 27, 2001. In Southern Africa, the Church of God and Saints of Christ is very active. The church has tabernacles in Durban, Soweto, Uitenhage, Port Elizabeth, Grahamstown, and Pretoria. There is a community without a permanent building in Khayelitsha Township in Cape Town. Shout out to Khayel, by the way, your name in here. And there are branches in Botswana, Swaziland, and Zimbabwe. The group is increasingly in contact with Judaizing groups everywhere, including the large groups in West Africa. Through the work Mekima Christian, Malaban, and Miskenya, the ideals of Black Judaism as expressed by Crowdy and to some extent adapted by Mekima spread throughout South Africa and beyond, influencing independent African churches such as the African Hebrew Community, the Church of God, the Saints of Christ, the Zionist churches, and the International Pentecostal Holiness Church, and many others, all of which have strong Israelite elements. The group's holiness Pentecostal style was to find fertile ground throughout Africa, and particularly in areas where indigenous forms of worship included spirit possession, prophecy, and faith healing. I want to talk about that spirit possession. When I was reading, I was like, is this talking about what happens in these Pentecostal churches, these holiness churches, when they get up and they get to shaking violently and the organ's playing and they jump up and down and they wobble all on the ground? Because if that's what that's talking about, then people have been right with their speculation of that practice, if that's dealing with what they thought was spirit possession. You know. Anyway, that's just something I was thinking when I was going over this. Let me keep reading. Black Israelite churches of different sorts subsequently spread throughout Southern and Eastern Africa, and Israelism became a critical part of Zionist churches of the independent church movement. If some of the impetus for these Israelite elements came from America, elsewhere the internalization of Israelite identities came to be traced back directly to colonial inventions. We have seen that in the early days of contact between whites and Zulus, there was a good deal of speculation about the relationship between Zulus and Israelites. To what extent were the ideas of the early explorers and colonists absorbed by the Zulus themselves? There is a remarkable collection of material collected by James Stewart, 1868 to 1942, A magistrate and fluent speaker of Zulu with a unique sense for the time in which he lived and of need to record in detail in the historical beliefs, traditions, and customs of the Zulu people. In his papers, we were vouchsafed one privileged glimpse of a particular conversation which reflects very clearly the kinds of processes we have been contemplating. In 1901, Stewart spent a day at the Royal Hotel in Ladysmith interviewing 3 Zulu elders in an attempt to recreate something of the Zulu past from the oral history retained by these men. In the conversations, one of them, Lazarus Mashaba, traced Zulu history back to ancient Israel and Greece and suggested that the Zulus were descended from the lost tribes of Israel. Many customs of the Zulus Mashaba maintained were common to Jews as well. He specifically mentioned the butchering of sacrificial meat and the burning of incense for sacrificial and other ritual purposes. He also maintained that the Jews, like the Zulus, slit their earlobes. These common features proved to Mashaba that there had been contact between Jews and Zulus in the past. Stewart accepted that such common features existed, but could not understand how the Zulus could be descended from the lost tribes of Israel since they had lost any knowledge of the Godhead. I want to speak to that. A lot of people that have these arguments against whether or not you're an Israelite or not, it's always based off religious tenets. Or, well, are you following monotheism, or are you following what we think is a Jewish structure? But the question is not what religion these people follow or what gods they worship. The question is, are they lineal descendants of Israelites? And I find it fascinating that we're in 2021. Now, this conversation took place in the 19th century, but we're in 2021 and people are still arguing that way or speaking or having conversations, and it's never about descendancy. The argument should be about descendancy. You understand? Because that's the argument. These people are claiming to be direct descendants. If they're claiming to be direct descendants, then we will be arguing descendancy. Not, are you today following Judaism like these Western Jewish communities are following? No, that I feel like that is a red herring, and it's not even touching the subject. But anyway, that's just my commentary. Let me keep reading. Mashaba pointed out that even the Israelites had forgotten their God and started worshiping the golden calf. So he had a rebuttal. He was like, well, even if you look at the Bible, especially if you go to Judges, he's talking about what happened in the wilderness. But if you go to Judges, I mean, it tells you that many of the Israelites strayed away from the Most High, followed Baal and other Canaanite deities and Ugaritic deities and other gods and other religious structures and cultic practices that did not relate to Yahwistic cultic practices. So that was a great rebuttal, because again, it's about descendancy, not about what religion you follow. Because again, you talk like the Sumerians, and many of the Sumerians followed a multiplicity of gods, Assyrian gods, Aramaean gods, you name it, Egyptian gods. That's recorded history. Anyway, let's keep reading. It says, if the Israelites could forget in such a short time, clearly it was not surprising that in the course of the centuries, the Zulus had forgotten too. So that was his argument in rebuttal to what Stewart had said. Stewart mentioned that, in fact, there were those in Britain who believed that the British too were descended from the lost tribes. Mashaba wanted to know what points in common existed between the British and the Jews. Now watch this. Stewart had no ready reply. Mashaba was unimpressed. So I read that, I chuckled, I laughed. And he was like, look, man, you questioning me, and then you talk about, well, these British people are Israelites, and then I ask you, can you give me any proof or evidence? And you tell me, and you don't have none. And he was like, okay, I'm unimpressed. We're done here. I just found that hilarious. And a lot of people today, even if you think someone's wrong, at least if they bring evidence to the table, then we have something to discuss. If you don't bring any evidence, all you bring is skepticism. We don't have anything to discuss. That's not a discussion. You're a cynic at that point. And we're all trying to recapitulate history. History is dark. We don't know much about it. 96% of ancient history is vamoose. It's gone. We can't see anything. We have to use a lot of inferential and circumstantial data on a lot of the models that we build. and we try to build the strongest, most applicable model that we can. And that's just across the board. If you know anything about academia, that's how they work. That's their framework. And that's why a lot of them remain objective and remain open. Like I was speaking yesterday about myth. When people hear about myth, just like Ida Bruder says in her book, is not referencing pure fiction, because a myth can encapsulate historical realities. Like I was bringing up, because I was just reading about the three major kingdoms of Western Africa. One of them being Ghana, Ouagadougou, found by the Senike. And the Senike people have a legend of them worshiping their God, and their God bringing forth rain and gold. Well, that legend is not all the way false. Okay, you can say, well, the God is mysticism, and then worshiping the God is mysticism, and that's cultic practice. Fine. But the actual matter of it is when that area, that region that they lived on the Niger Bend, when that area received heavy rainfall, the alluvial deposits would overflow, and that gold would flow down the river, and the people would collect the gold. So they would relate the rainfall to gold, and they will relate all of that as blessings from their deity to their patron deity, their patron deity. So again, just because something's a legend or a myth doesn't mean it doesn't encapsulate historical reality. And that's how academia uses it. All right, so let's get back to it. Mashaba was unimpressed. He was convinced that it was the Zulus who, in fact, were the lost children of Israel, and that they would be redeemed when they redeemed and started worshiping their lost and unknown God. By 1900, then the idea that the Zulus were of Israelite origin, which had been presented to them time and time again throughout the 19th century, had been internalized and incorporated by some into their own religious heritage. What is beyond any reasonable doubt is that before colonial and missionary intervention in the area, the Israelite trope would not have been used as an explanation of the origins of the Zulu people. And, you know, one thing, Tudor Parfitt would say that, but I'm like, how would you know that unless you own a time machine? So I differ with him on that opinion there. But again, it's all our opinion and what we're trying to express on ancient peoples and what actually happened in the past while we're trying to recapitulate this thing. But I find it weird that he would say that, and how would you know that if you didn't actually live during those times? We all give an emphasis and hypothesis about this stuff. All right, let's keep reading. It says, the idea regularly enunciated throughout the 19th century that the Tutsis too were of Israelite or Middle Eastern origin has also put down deep roots. Tutsi outside Africa today have an organization called Havilah, which promotes the idea of Israelite supremacy in the Great Lakes area. On the website of Kulanu, the American-based organization interested in lost Jewish communities, there is a piece that corresponds perfectly with some of the Hamitic theories we have seen above. These tall, muscular, highly intelligent, and arrogant warriors claim to be remnants of Israel. The Banya Mulinj of the South Kivu province, Congo, have told me of the following. They came from Ethiopia in ancient times to protect the high holy places on Mount Kilimanjaro and the secret gold and diamond mines for the house of Israel. They came long before their Watusi brothers, who also migrated to the Great Lakes region from Ethiopia. They claimed their ancient sacred calling was the basis for the first legends of King Solomon's lost mines. Watusi Tutsis of Rwanda and Burundi have told me the following. Their ancestors were disaffected royal family members from the remnants of the house of Israel living in Ethiopia who migrated to the land of the everlasting hills in the Great Lakes region of Central Africa. The Israelite Tutsis have appeared to Israel and to the international community in general and have asked them to condemn and take action against all anti-Israelite violence throughout Africa. In hostile French language report from Brussels, the accusation was made that the process of Judaization of the Tutsis is no more than a means of taking over the whole area. According to this, the term Havilah is used by the Judaizing Tutsis to describe the whole region of the Great Lakes, which they see as a future Judaic empire. Havilah meetings are customarily adorned with Jewish symbols such as the Star of David and also with depictions of the Drum of Solomon, over which the lords of Havilah are guardians. The movement claims to have number of research centers dedicated to the idea of recovering the lost memory of the Hebraic culture of the Cushitic peoples, the guardians of minds of Solomon. The Israelite Tutsis, inspired by the teachings of Yochanan Baweri, who believes that the Tutsis are literally one of the lost tribes of Israel, are drawn by the notion of the salvation of Israel, and they believe that the physical reunification of the lost tribes of Africa is taking place. But Baweri has fully internalized not only the idea of remote Israelite racial ancestry, but also a more recent Jewish past. As he wrote, 90 years ago, my ancestors, the renowned pastoralists Watusi Tusi, Israelites of Kush and Burundi, Rwanda, Eastern Congo, Uganda, Northern Tanzania, wore tzitzit and had tefillin. Today, the survivors were fear, humiliation, and despair. Millions of Tutsis have been killed, and the ongoing Holocaust is the endless tragedy of, again and again, the Tutsis of Batusi Watusi are the traditional keepers of the South Kush Jewish kingdoms. The general discourse equating Tutsis with Israelites or other Middle Eastern peoples started with Speak in the 19th centuries. It was taken as serious science by the German and later Belgian colonial authorities and subsequently came to have an impact upon the local population. In the Rwanda crisis, the Africa scholar Gerard Prunier explained that the massacres of 800,000 Rwandese, mainly Tutsis, in 1994 was a function of a racially obsessed colonial heritage, and particularly of the way in which racialist and cultural projections and constructions of the 19th century and later, fortified by Western influence linked with the ruthless attempts to exploit intertribal tensions, led inexorably to the genocide by inflating the Tutsis' cultural ego inordinately and crushing Hutu feelings until they coalesce into an aggressively resentful inferiority complex. The Tutsis were constructed as a superior racial category because of their non-Negro characteristics. And I want to speak on this as well. I have done a video on this. Phenotypes does not matter. And this Hamitic hypothesis thing, it relied heavily on phenotype. It relied heavily on white supremacy, on Caucasian supremacy in this instance, where they would say, if you look Caucasian, or if your skull cast is Caucasian, skinny nose and the head looks Caucasian, then you are superior, or you descend from a superior class. If you look what we call Negroid, then you are inferior. So that was scientific racism that was being employed, and this is how they were trying to cause rifts between certain tribes in Africa. And yes, this discussion came into the play and got mixed up in the hoshposh known as scientific racism. No one's rejecting that. That's history. You understand? So the Hutus felt enraged, and as we're going to see, they sought to do to the Tutsis as what the Nazis did to the Eastern or Polish Jews in Germany. Let's keep reading. The Tutsis were constructed as a superior racial category because of their non-Negro characteristics, which I just made commentary on. That is erroneous and scientific racism. Check my video out on the channel. Phenotypes does not matter. You can be genetically related to someone and not look like them. They could look like a quote-unquote European, and you can look like a quote-unquote Negroid, and you guys can still be related to each other. So that's all hogwash point of views, antiquated. It needs to completely die. A lot of people are still arguing like this in 2021 with all this technology and science that we have. Why it's beyond me. You know what I'm saying? If you say a lot enough, and we'll get where we at now. The modern racial theory needs to die, and many people are still pushing it, and we still live under it. We still put it on applications of the modern racial theory. That's how we fill it out, and that's part of the issue. But anyway, back to the reading. It says, non-Negro characteristics in time, the idea of a distant Hamitic or Semitic past for the Tutsis was used by the Hutu against them, as one journalist put it. Just like the Nazis, the Hutus were told it was their patriotic duty. The same intention existed, the complete elimination of the targeted group. The same words were used. The final solution The mistake that was made in earlier massacres, allowing thousands of Tutsis to escape to live in exile, plotting ways to come back, was not to be repeated. Leon Mugesera, an influential member of the Habyarimana government, said in 1992, the fatal mistake we made in 1959 was to let them Tutsis get out. They belong to Ethiopia, and we are going to find them a shortcut to get there by throwing them into the Nyabarongo River. I must insist on this point. After this 1994 massacre at Philip Ray Nichin's, professor of Africa law and politics at the University of Antwerp and an expert in Rwanda has pointed out, some Tutsi parties such as the Parena and PRP adopted the general outlines of the Hamitic Israelite myth as part of their political credo, thereby invoking the Jewish origin of the Tutsi. Their Jewish perspective may have received some support from an article that was published in the Jerusalem Post on November the 23rd, 1998, in which Geneva-based Tajin Moose observed that the Ethiopian Hebrew Israelites from Gwihan are also found in East Africa, where they are called Tutsi. The flag of the Burundi, dominated by the Tutsi, still bears the Star of David. And he evoked the genocide of more than 500,000 Tutsi Hebrew Israelites from Rwanda. Moose elsewhere has argued that the Queen of Sheba sent the Tutsi to protect the White Nile and to found a tributary kingdom. Rachins has noted among many different groups in the area, not just Tutsi and Hutu, a general adoption of polarized Bantu or Hamitic identities, which are taken to be necessary, inimical one to the other. The fact that the Tutsi Israelite myth was formulated at all, according to Rachins, and above all repeated by Burundian actors, illustrates the great desire to use identity as a pawn. So again, like I said, Dr. Tudor Parfitt is objective. He gives you pros and cons. He gives you one source that agreed with the ideology, and he gives you another source that wasn't in favor of the ideology and disagreed with it vehemently. So that's how this scholar rocks, and that's how all scholars should rock when they're writing their papers and their books and their work. Reading on. A Jewish journalist who was in Rwanda in 2010 noted, I was surprised when I arrived in the emerald green country to find people treat me like a brother. I was greeted with a fist pound and a touch to the heart by the money changer, who called me a fellow Jew. But what caught my attention most were the references to Israel, the references to the Jews. At first, it seemed obvious. As historical cousins of genocide, Israel and Rwanda had a special bond. Like Israel, Rwanda had escaped genocide to become a shining example in a troublesome part of the world. But the reference and affirmation was much more than historical contingency. It was, according to them, true blood. According to some historians and Tutsi scholars, the group originally came to Rwanda from Ethiopia in the 15th century. To Tutsis, the genealogical lineage to Ethiopia connects them to a greater constellation, including ancient Hebrews. For people like Claude Bismana, a former soldier who fought alongside President Paul Kagame, the link has become a useful shorthand. That's where the Jews live, he said, pointing to a shadowy suburban Kigali home in the dark, starry night. Those were all non-Jews, he says. Moving his finger all around, when he introduces me to his friends, he begins with a familiar greeting. He is also a Jew, Claude says to me. Josh is an Israelite too, he says to his friend. On October 17, 2011, I received an email from the Havilah Institute in which Tutsi spiritual leader Yakanan Bawari, also Prince of Nkoronko, invited me to watch a video which is available on YouTube. In the words of the email with the video test, the Tutsi Jews are captured through their genuine voice, their concrete faces, and 1,000 years expectation for Geula, redemption. The video shows a kind of biblical world that some people don't like to see or deal with, but a colorful world that is physically sounded and almost touched and even smelt. The video makes it clear that there is a deeply held view that the Tutsi people originated in the land of Israel, that they are literally of the seed of Abraham. So again, these people are not saying Jewish missionaries came down there and converted them, they're saying, hey, we think that we're the actual Jews. We actually descend from Abraham. Keep reading. And Kenyan, similarly, there are Judaizing Christian movements, including a branch of the American Church of the Living God, and there are examples of different groups, including the agrarian, Meru, and pastoralist Kalenjin tribes that have internalized colonial attempts to explain their history and who now claim origins from the lost tribes. In pre-independence days, there was a black Jewish community in the town of Old Kalu near Gathundia, Central Province, where the remains of their Mount Zion synagogue may still be seen. Theories suggesting in the Israelite origin for the Messiah are still to be found 100 years or so after the first colonial suggestions that they were of Jewish origin. Leonard Hedley, a self-proclaimed prophet of the Messiah and bishop evangelist, wrote, I had the great honor of being received into their confidence by a society that has been closed to outsiders. I've sat with their elders and heard their story, which has been passed down to them only by word of mouth. Elders of the Messiah have told their people for nearly 100 generations. We crossed the great sea with a man named Moses. So the children of Israel went into the midst of the sea. Exodus 14:22. Their history of crossing the Red Sea as mighty warriors and devoted countermen was consistent with tribal language to the Manasseh. I had seen many times of the culture of to the laws of Moses, such as drink offerings, no graven images, and not eating pork. As leaders emerge among the Christian Messiah, they tell me of their receiving a revelation of God speaking to them about their relationship with Israel. Close quote. Both Africans and African Americans appropriated and advocated Judaism, Jewishness, Jewish history, often an Israelite bloodline, in their attempts to counter oppression, gain approval, recreate lost history, revolt against white authority, and forge new, more useful identities. So again, even if you take away everything else, you say, oh, we don't believe you guys not Israelites. Cool. Y'all can't say that none of that stuff's true. That's not true. You can't say that's not true. It countered oppression. It recreated and recapitulated lost history. It revolted against white authority, not comply with it. It revolted against it. So again, from a mentalist standpoint, that's something you can see and you can't argue against that. That's just what it was. All right, let's get back to the reading. The mingling of biblical and old and new local oral histories and what Eric Hobsbawm calls the invention of tradition, often a racialized framework, was a very widespread phenomenon both in Africa and the United States. But it was not simply a question of molding and adapting rituals or tribal traditions, myths, and practices. Often the creation of a Jewish or Israelite identity not only involved new processes of formalization or ritualization, but also a new genealogy. The claims of Enadon and Mali, who claim to descend of King David, or traditions in Uganda claiming the ancient lineage of 33 kings going back to King David. Let me stop right here. This is also, this same new genealogy thinking is also replete in the Sephardim and Ashkenazis, because what do they say? They claim they come from, I directly descend from David. I directly descend from Solomon. They do the same thing to, bolster their lineage. So that's not something that's particular, exclusive to these African tribes. Let me keep reading. He said the claims of the Indian and Mali, who claims the descent from King David, or traditions to Uganda claiming an ancient lineage of 33 kings going back to King David, or the Ethiopians who claim to go back to King Solomon, or the Igbo, Tutsi, Maasai, or Yoruba, are some of the Yabir clan in Somalia, or of the black Jews in different parts of the United States, evoking very ancient Ethiopian. Middle Eastern or Israelite ancestry are predicated on the understanding of that being a Jew is, in its essence, something to do with descent and race, rather more than belief and ritual. So again, the argument is not, well, do these people follow Talmudic practices? I seen a guy today on YouTube try to use that as an argument, and I'm like, I just went over this. Like, what's wrong with y'all? It's more about making and establishing a pedigree, a genealogical record that can show that, hey, we go back to these people that are Jews, not regardless if or irrespective to their culture or their belief. A great example of that is the Sakor, being led by Ishmael Hayadar. Many of those people are Islamic in faith and belief, but many of those people teach that they're Jews, and they have the records to prove it, that they come from the Amana family, the Kohati family, or the Kati family. Some being regarded as these Sephardim, some being regarded as the Jews of Tawat, and so on and so forth. But many of those people are only normative Jews or nominal Jews, Jews in name. They're not practicing Judaism. They're not referencing to the Midrash or the Halakha. They're not referencing none of that stuff. They're following many of the tenets of, Islam and the Quran. They're not following anything to do with Judaism. They just understand that, hey, my ancestors were Jews. And that's really the essence of the argument, just like Tudor Parfitt beautifully put it in his book. Its essence something to do with descent and race rather more than belief in ritual. Let me see. I knew that was the end of the book. I remember that. All right, man. Chapter 9. The finale. We finally here, man. You know how I'm rocking, man. You know how we doing? We actually read over here. You see us knocking at the door. Let the shooters in. All right. I want you guys to tune in tomorrow. Let's try 7, 8. And we will be dealing with the finale of the book. Chapter 9. History, Genetics, and Indigenous Black African Jews. And when I say Tudor Parfitt ended this book with a banger, y'all just have to wait. Yeah, I'm not gonna spoil it, man. Shout out to the Parfitt, Dr. Tudor Parfitt, man. I appreciate your objective look at this and your time that you put into this book and your research, and you actually living amongst Limba and you living amongst these various tribes and actually visiting them and taking out your time to study and write this down for something that has been largely ignored in academia. So, kudos to you. Can't wait to get to this chapter tomorrow, man. You know what I'm saying? We read over here, man. Take a look at the book. Reading Rainbow. All right, man. Let me see what the comments are saying. Chapter 9 tomorrow, man. Thursday. Y'all tune in. What's going on, James? What James talking about, man? What my brother James talking about? Hey, hit that like button, by the way. Hey, shalom, game man. I hope y'all got some history out of this, man. A lot of history was in that chapter. You know what I'm saying? Y'all gotta be well aware of this history, man. A lot of people gonna hit you with it. You get in the right circles. James Cassell said, just was dealing with a religious-minded Israelite a minute ago. Dude told me I shouldn't speak on anything if it's not in the oracle. See, that's what I'm saying. That's over religious. Like, you can't speak on nothing? What if I want to teach my son trigonometry? I can't read. I got to find it in the Bible. Like, stop. Like, that's too damn religious. I need to cut that out. And the Bible warns people from doing that. It's be not over righteous. Solomon said that. James said they can't stand up to the source. Our champ is a hip. Exactly, because here's the thing. I'm going to actually read, study, and disseminate the information. They're just going to make commentary on their YouTube channel and skim. I'm going to actually take the time out and read this stuff. Yeah, man, tomorrow. Hey, just come on. I'll give you the link tomorrow. We can do it together. Yeah, man. I'm about to shut it down. Great show. We finished chapter 8. Tomorrow is the finale. The end of the book. Chapter 9 is it. There's nothing after chapter 9. So, again, as promised, I will be archiving this book. And y'all, Y'all just, I'm glad y'all being patient with me. Edith Bruder's book will be finished by next week. I'm going to upload all the PowerPoints, get all my slides ready for it because I don't have the digital of that one. I have the physical. I'm going to upload all my PowerPoint slides and get that ready for y'all. That's going to be chapter, I think, 7, 8, and 9. Oh, no, or 8, 9, and 10. Yeah, 8, 9, and 10 in the epilogue. And we're going to finish her book. Her book is amazing. The last 3 chapters, okay, but I'm hyped for y'all. I'm hyped for y'all. The last 3 chapters, you know what I'm saying? Edith Bruder's book is a banger, man. She was under the tutelage of Tudor Parfitt, and the thing, her mind and how she thinks and how she processes information. I like it a lot. I'm really enjoying her book. Yeah, man. R.W. Smith says high quality stuff. Yeah, man. We try to keep the quality high over here and actually deal with material, man. The mother cats is all on sensationalism, man. That's it. The echo chambers. We really trying to build edification and education and push that to the forefront instead of, this other BS that permeates the internet. Like, we're not rocking with that. You know what I'm saying? All right, man. That's the end of the show, man. I'm in the show with my brother LV Europa. I let him do the whole. His music been all throughout this journey that we've been on and completing this book with you guys. So we're not gonna break the trend. Brother said. Sister says, sorry. Game Anthony says, looking forward to the reasoning session regarding this information. Yeah, we can do that. We can do that. All right, that's in the show. Let me pull up my brother LV Europa. You know what I'm saying? And close the show out, man. We'll be covering chapter 9, Tudor Parfitt's book, Black Jews in Africa and the Americas. The book will be concluded tomorrow, Thursday night. Tune in. All right. All right. That's in with our brother LV Europa. Hit that like button. Subscribe to the channel. Share the video on the various social media platforms. All right. Love y'all, man. Appreciate all y'all.
Yeah. I got a visa, that's one swipe. The change of the meter, I got that all money, baby. That bitch came with a FIFA, cold as a freezer, free heat up in my leisure. I feel like a fever, baby. You know I'm a keeper, I got a visa, that's one swipe. The change of the meter, I got that all money, baby. That bitch came with a FIFA, cold as a freezer, free heat up in my leisure. I feel like a fever, baby. You should know that I'm a keeper. Jesus keep saying, hey, and you can keep that tucked away. Some gon' come with the lies. Remember them when you pray. Some gon' cry when they die. You don't worry about the cave. Look, I done went away. My time is short, so I'ma live it today. That shit was real. What happened to the slaves? But you gotta be brave. This a land of the free. Gotta move like waves. Hey, put the ring to the path. I give them path for the rage. Then I put them on the path to take them all up the stage. I got a visa, that's one swipe. The change of the meter, I got that all money, baby. That bitch came with a fever, cold as a freezer, free heat up in my leisure. I feel like a fever, baby. You know I'm a keeper, I got a visa, that's one swipe. The change of the meter, I got that all money, baby. That bitch came with a fever, cold as a freezer, free heat up in my leisure. I feel like a fever, baby. You should know that I'm a keeper. This is the keepsake, hey. You can use this right away. Some gon' come with the truth. Honor them when you pray. Some gon' laugh about their life. They don't worry about the lays. Look, I done whipped up away that lever's real when you can use it today. Don't worry about how you're gonna get paid. Lord, keep it free, take it for away. Don't you wanna be free? Remove that rage. There's a path to the light. Don't misuse those ways. We flow with the truth. Gotta move like waves. I got a visa, that's one swipe. The change of the meter, I got that all money, baby. That bitch came with a fever, cold as a freezer. Heat up in my leisure. I feel like a fever, baby. You know I'm a keeper, I got a visa, that's one swipe. The change of the meter, I got that all money, baby. That bitch came with a fever, cold as a freezer. I heat up in my leisure. I feel like a fever, baby. You should know that I'm a keeper.
All right, we out, man. Come in tomorrow. I will be back, and we will be concluding the book, chapter 9. 7 gang, source gang over everything. You know I'm rocking, man. Gang.